Hi everyone, and welcome to the Mike's DIY Tips channel on YouTube. I'm Mike, and in this video I'd like to focus on how to adjust and realign cupboard unit doors fitted with adjustable hinges like this. There's only a small amount of adjustment available on these hinges, but hopefully it'll be enough to bring your doors back into neat alignment to all line up with the adjoining doors. If that is not possible because the door wear or door strain is too much, then I'm afraid you've either got to put up with what you've got or consider replacing the hinges. If you do replace hinges, always replace all of the hinges on the same door. So now let's have a look at some sample adjustable hinges. There are basically two types. This is the type of adjustable hinge that you're very likely to see on kitchen units, bathroom cupboard units and wardrobe doors. This plate fastens to the back of the door, and that arm fixes to that plate there, which screws into the side panel of the cupboard unit. The thing to note about these hinges is that most of them only allow the door to open as far as about 110 degrees. This is the same hinge but with a cover plate over those screws. So if you're looking for the adjusting screws on that arm there, look for a plate to flick off like that to expose the screws. Here's another variation. This hinge looks much the same as what I've just shown you, but in actual fact it is thicker and deeper. In other words, this arm is much chunkier because the hinge has got a special mechanism inside to give the soft close. When the door is pulled closed by the spring, it's in slow motion to stop the door slamming, called a soft close. The fixing holes are the same as the other hinges, so if you wanted to change some of your hinges to the soft close type, you can do so. This is a more complicated hinge because it's designed to allow the door to open right back to 170 degrees, which is very good in a busy area of the kitchen where the door is often likely to be strained on its hinges. The adjusting screws on that arm are not visible to the camera, but they are accessible through that gap there to push the screwdriver in. And if you like this idea, you can swap existing hinges and put these on because the fixing hole positions are the same. All of the hinges that I've shown you so far have an arm which fixes to the side panel of the cupboard unit. However, this one is fitted onto a tall wardrobe door and it goes onto the fascia of the front frame of the wardrobe, so that the configuration of the hinge is entirely different and the method of adjustment is different, which I'll show you shortly. So that plate goes onto the back of the door and this fixing plate goes onto this fascia. To help me demonstrate hinge adjustment, I've made this mock-up of part of a cupboard and part of a door fitted with adjustable hinges. If you've never studied one of these hinges before, you could be puzzled by all of the screws that you can see. Let's eliminate two of them. Those two are simple fixing screws holding that plate on the back of the door. So all of the available adjustment lies within the scope of those four screws. Let's do one of the movements to adjust the door. Let's suppose we want to move the whole door up or down in order to line the top with the neighbouring doors to make it look very neat. The fixing plate for this hinge arm is something like that, with elongated holes, meaning that when those fixing screws are slightly loosened, the whole plate can move up and down slightly. We can't just adjust one hinge though, we have to adjust both hinges on the door. We don't need to loosen much. So as you can see, we've got that up and down movement. So when you're happy with it, tighten up all the screws. An alternative to this plate, like that, is this one. And it's different in the sense that there are no elongated screw holes, they're just round fixing holes, and the adjustment all comes from turning that one screw one way or the other to give you the up and down adjustment. Let's have a look at the movement that you can get from the hinge in order to control that gap down there. You mainly want to control that gap to stop the door binding on the edge of the panel, and you want to control the gap to ensure it's not too big and unsightly if you can see it from the side of the cupboard. So the way we do that is to loosen this one screw here. I must emphasise just the one screw. It might look as though both screws are holding this in place, but that is for something else that you will see shortly. This is the fixing screw, the one furthest from the door. Just loosen that slightly, enough to get a sliding effect like that. And when you're happy with the gap, just tighten up the screw again. And if needs be, you can do the same with the top. I should only do one at a time though, so that you've got control of the door. A few moments ago I said leave that screw alone. Now we do want to use that screw because that is not a fixing screw, it's a dedicated adjustment screw. It's like a screw jack. As I turn it clockwise, this bottom edge of the door is coming this way. If I turn it anti-clockwise, like that, the door goes that way. Sometimes you have to slightly ease the fixing screw, otherwise this is very, very tight to turn. But don't forget to retighten the fixing screw when you finish the adjustment. Now I want to demonstrate it again this way, because at the moment I've got the door set so that the top edge is sloping down, as you can see with that pencil line there, and I'm going to adjust the bottom screw at the moment. So I'm winding the bottom edge across to the left, and you can see that we're starting to get level. Now I'm going to do it with the top screw. Anti-clockwise on that one, and now you can see that we're coming nice and level. And what we should also find is that the right hand side is level as well, which it is. So far we've only dealt with doors fitted with 2 hinges, but you can get a situation where you've got a taller door, especially on a wardrobe, where you've probably got 4 hinges fitted, and so controlling the adjustment on those is a little bit more tricky, needs a little bit more thought, and you need some help. Do try and get an assistant who will hold the door in place, stop it from falling away from the wardrobe installation, and then you can focus on which screws to turn and then tighten up the screws to make it safe again. So for the up and down movement that we looked at, you need to loosen all of the screws in the fixing plate. This is the screws that have the elongated holes. So those two, those two, those two, those two. Just loosen them slightly so that we can get some up and down movement. So there's your up and down movement, and when you've got it how you want it, just tighten up a couple of the screws in order to check what you've done by closing the door and checking the line up. When you're happy, then you can go along and tighten up all the other screws. Now then, the movement of the door this way, which controls that gap there. If you remember, we loosened this one single fixing screw at the end of the hinge arm furthest from the door. So what I suggest is don't loosen all of them, keep one hinge screwed tight so that you've got some control. So if we leave that one tight, we loosen those and loosen this one. Now we've got that side movement there, and when we've got this gap how we want it, tighten up. Still leave those loose for the moment, and then go down and loosen the bottom one and adjust that gap there. And when you're happy with it, tighten up. So now the door is held with that gap how you want it, and you've just got to tighten up those screws there. And for safety, double check that all the screws are screwed up tight. Now if instead of these plates with elongated holes like that, you've got one of these where you turn the adjusting screw, then the way to go with all four hinges is you've got nothing to loosen, so you just got purely adjustment. So what you have to do is to adjust each hinge, turning that screw a little bit at a time, turning the screwdriver the same way and about the same amount of turn. And just keep on adjusting until you get the height that you want for the door. When I was demonstrating with just two hinges, I showed you a way of adjusting the hinge to make the door go that way or that way. So you would use that to get this edge vertical, perhaps move that hinge that way and this one this way to get the correct line up, or you could use the adjustment to move both hinges in the same direction to change the position of this door edge in relation, say, to the door next to it. And the way we did it, if you remember, was we used this single adjusting screw. This is the one nearest to the door. Turning the screw clockwise makes the door come this way. Turning it anti-clockwise makes the door go that way. So if we want all of the door to uniformly come this way, that's easy because we just adjust each screw exactly the same amount. So in other words, you turn the screwdriver in the same direction, the same amount on all four screws. Then close the door and check how it's lining up, and if you want some more adjustment then you can do it again. But if you've got a situation where the top of the door is sloping down, then you would want to adjust this hinge and the others to make the door go that way. So this is where it becomes a little bit tricky, and you have to use your imagination and watch carefully how much you turn the screwdriver on each screw. So the top one we're going to turn anti-clockwise because we want to make the door go that way. So anti-clockwise, and try doing a quarter turn of the screwdriver anti-clockwise. Then if you've done that a quarter turn, do this about 2/3 of that, and this about 1/3 of it, and this one you leave alone. Now you should find that the door has moved over, and if it hasn't moved over sufficiently to get a vertical line, then repeat the process. If by any chance you get completely out of sync, maybe you get interrupted and you've forgotten how much you've turned each screw, and especially if you sense that the door is quite hard to close, it could be because the hinge pivot points are not all lined up, and therefore you're causing great strain on the hinges. So what I suggest you do there is go to each adjusting screw, turn it clockwise, right in as far as it'll go, and then start all over again to try and get the adjustment that you want. I've made a different door mock-up now to represent a tall wardrobe door which is fastened to the fascia surround to the frontage of the wardrobe. It's an entirely different hinge with different methods and more restricted ways of adjustment. I've focused in on one of these hinges so that I can explain which screw does what. Those two screws are simply fixing screws, fixing that plate to the door. At the other end of the hinge, we've got another fixing plate here with two fixing screws screwed into the fascia, but those screw holes are elongated so that if we loosen the screws, we can get an up and down sliding movement, which you've seen before. Separate to that, we've got another single screw here which holds this hinge arm onto this back plate, but also if you loosen that we get a sliding action which gives us a little bit of movement of the door side to side, which you've seen before. When you've moved the door up and down and arrived at your new position, you can retighten those screws at the top and the bottom while you try the door. But a word of caution: if you undo those screws too much, the screw head sticks out, and when you move the door edge like that, the screw head is likely to damage the edge of the door. Likewise, if the screw head is sticking out, you won't be able to close the door properly to try it out. So for the side-to-side adjustment, I suggest that you leave the bottom hinge screw fixed tight and just release this screw on the other three hinges, 1, 2, 3. That will allow us to have a bit of slide on the hinge arm. Be careful though, because it's possible to move this too far and the actual hinge arm come detached. So you need to make sure that your assistant is aware of that and is fully taking the weight of the door. So with all those three hinges free to slide, when you've got the top of the door where you think it needs to be, tighten up the screw and just carefully try the door and see if that gives you the line up that you want. When you're happy, then you can tighten up those screws. If you need to move the bottom of the door from left to right, in other words this way, keep the top screw tight and release those three screws to enable you to move the bottom of the door, and then when you're happy, tighten up all the screws. One final adjustment, which is a crude one, and that is if you find that the edge of the door is binding on the fascia, then you can pack out this bracket with a piece of thick cardboard, and those holes were made with an office paper punch. So there you are then. I hope that enables you to adjust your hinges and get your cupboard unit doors nicely aligned. Here's a couple of reminders. For the taller, heavier doors, do get yourself an assistant, because they can worry about the door taking its weight and stopping it dropping off its hinges while you concentrate on the adjustment procedure. The second reminder is, after fiddling with all of the screws, go over them again with a screwdriver and make sure that they are all tight. If you'd like to watch any of my other videos, there are some icons coming up on screen now which you can click and watch. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again very soon.